So we have a couple thoughts just to open this here. Really, the point of this panel is to tell the story of the evolution and growth of the Cardano ecosystem and the community, from the founding vision to where we're headed next. So wanted to highlight a few key moments here and memories that illustrate elements of that journey and say, to just reiterate the founding principles, outline opportunity and the potential for wider industry impact for Voltaire and how governance can really shape the blockchain industry, and how the community has the opportunity to do more and do something that's never been seen before in the blockchain industry, so in this space and beyond. So my question, this is my favorite question, this is why I put it first. The first time you really saw sparks of a community in the Cardano ecosystem. Now this is, I've got an answer for Tim already, so if nothing's coming to mind immediately, we can go to Tim. But the first time you really saw community for the first time.
I'll never forget it. I was in New York City for Consensus. It's a community organic, because there's also the community we sought to build and things. Like there's a Japanese communities and things. But this was actually before Cardano had even launched. I was at Consensus in 2017. And this was when EOS took over all of Consensus, and they had this giant party, and they were on New York, Times Square, where they're up on the screen and all that stuff. And I was recognized on the street by a random person who wasn't even going to Consensus, and he says, "You're Charles Hoskinson." I was like, here we go again, Ethereum. He's gonna ask the Ethereum store. He's like, "You're the guy who's working on that thing called Cardano." And I was like, yeah. First time it ever happened. He said, "I'm going to a meetup about it." I said, "What? Meetup?" And it was like 5 guys drinking beers, and went out there and hung out with them for about 2 hours. And we were talking about the future and these things, because he'd seen some videos, and I bought him beer. And that was the very first time I saw that. It just blew my mind, because we hadn't quite marketed it yet. We hadn't quite really started going out there and talking about Cardano and things. It's just videos and AMAs and these things. And then when it almost became like Fight Club for a little while, where I'd go to places, like I was also in Canada, I was leaving Vancouver, and I was checking in, and I was getting these weird vibes from the guy checking me in, and I was like, fuck, I'm gonna have 4 S's on my ticket, and they're gonna like strip search me and shit. They think I'm a terrorist or something. And so after I finished checking in, the guy kind of leaned over, and it was like a Fight Club moment. He's like, "I love Ada." And I was like, "Oh, I'm Tyler Durden, all right, ooh, this is exciting." So those were the first moments that I saw the real hint of community, and they were pretty magical. Tim, anything on your side?
Yeah, it's interesting. My very first day at IOG, just to give you a little bit of a flavour, I think I saw the spark on the very first day I joined the company, because my very first day at IOG, well, let's say I signed my contract on Miami Beach, and 3 hours later I was at the convention centre at the 2019 Miami Summit. And it was particularly fascinating for me. I'd kind of been vaguely within the environment of the crypto and blockchain space for a few years. I was working at Visa in their innovation unit in London when I had my first kind of professional experience in the Bitcoin area. And of course, at that sort of time, the market was kind of going that way. By the time I joined IOG, the market had long gone that way. So it was at a kind of a fairly bleak time, I think, in the industry. But what was so fascinating to me about that event was I'd arrived at this place, and here was a real community of people who'd kind of got behind this vision. It felt much more like a political movement with an overly keen interest in technology rather than anything else at that stage. But it was instantly fascinating to see that, particularly since my professional background from then before had been very much in top-down, command and control type corporations, creating products, and probably, for someone like Sony, who I worked for a while, the closest thing you got to a community was a bunch of guys kind of queuing up outside the store to get their first version of a Sony phone, or arguing about megapixels on various forums. It wasn't really the same thing at all, and I think that was my first exposure to a kind of a true blockchain community in Miami, people who came from all over to really get behind something that was very much a vision at that stage. And I think, we can talk more about it, but I think what's been so fascinating for me about this journey, working at IOG within the Cardano community, is to see how the community has gone through those various phases. I wasn't there at the very beginning of Cardano, but I guess I was there at the end of the beginning, and the beginning of where we're heading now. So, yeah.
It was really hard at the very beginning.
The first time, I mentioned this earlier today, but the first time I noticed real community was when somebody invited me to a meetup and we were talking about this thing called the ITN, the Incentivized Testnet for Shelley. And to that point, my next question I wanted to ask you both, what lessons, especially on the social side and how we're talking with people, how we're presenting the opportunity, what lessons did we take away from the ITN that you'd like to see implemented with SanchoNet and getting people involved with the minimum viable government?
Okay, so first off, I got to tell the story, Tim. So, there needed to be training wheels to train people how to learn how to be stake pool operators. And so the problem was there's a gargantuan knowledge gap, not just amongst the community and the engineers at IO, but within the engineers of IO themselves, there was a group of people who deeply understood this stuff, and the vast majority of people did not. And that was usually the people who wrote the formal specifications, like Duncan and others, and the regular engineers. So we said we need training wheels to kind of show people how to do all this stuff, and they're going to take a little bit of time. So I thought, boy, it would be so amazing and cool to call this Replicant, because it would be named like it's almost Cardano, it's a replica of it. And then the incentivized testnet is not going to run for more than maybe 4 months, 6 months, and then we'll have to kill it. So then I'd have a Blade Runner protocol that we can go, and that would go and destroy the incentivized testnet. I thought that was the coolest thing in the whole world. And Tim overruled me. The marriage has never been the same since. But anyway, and I even bought the trench coat that Decker wore during Blade Runner, and I was going to have Harrison Ford come and steal it from me on stage, and never got to do it, because we didn't call it Replicant. God damn it. All right, but anyway, the key of that was that we expected maybe 50 people, 100 people to really take it seriously. We got over 1,000 stake pool operators on the incentivized testnet. In fact, there's probably people in this room who use the incentivized testnet. Can I see a show of hands? Look at that. Random conference, and you have people who weren't just stake pool operators on Cardano, but they were actually there during the early days, and they stuck with it. And the feedback we got from them, we thought it was going to be a one-way direction, where they would say, we need better educational materials, we need better guides. No, they'd actually come and say, you idiots, you've done this wrong, this is the way you need to do it. And we're like, yeah, that's a good point. So it was a remarkable relationship where there was this beautiful circle of knowledge transfer where they would teach us things, we would teach them things, and it made Cardano staking among the strongest in the history of the cryptocurrency space. Usually over 70% of the stake is delegated. Sometimes it fluctuates due to TVL and other things, but by and large, super majority of the ADA is delegated. There's thousands of operators, they're dynamic. If some decide to go to Paris and find true inspiration and become artists and never stake again, it doesn't kill us. If others decide to come in, it doesn't kill us. So that's an elastic system where control changes very rapidly, yet the system is sustainable and stable and it runs. Now you said, what lessons could we apply towards SanchoNet? Really, I think it breaks down to a few things. One is this idea of once you get to a certain point, stop, show and tell, and listen. You can't just assume you know everything. You're going to build everything, and everybody else just has to wake up to your brilliance. So what we did is we did through the workshops a deliberative process where we have exhausted the deliberation of 1694. There's no longer any more discussion of it. Well, it's not productive. You're polishing something. The next step is to have a testnet where people actually try to break it, show problems with it, use it, and in the process of using it, they're going to come back with thousands of conversations. Going back to like Baldur's Gate 3, that I keep mentioning it, because it's an amazing thing, 22,000 years of playtime. They worked on it for 6 years. They release it. 1 month later, they have a patch coming out with already 1,000 fixes. Now, they've been working on it for 6 years. You'd think there'd not be that many bugs. But no, 1,000 fixes. They say we probably have 3 months of backlog beyond this just to fix what we know, not what we'd like to add or change that we didn't have time for. So with 1694, the exact same thing should happen. It's a basic principle. Shut up and listen, because those people have something very important to say. The second thing was that during the ITN, because we didn't build something, the community didn't come to us and say, oh, well, I guess we have to go home, it just can't. They just built their own stuff. So there's now this ecosystem of stuff that's come as a result of the ITN, which is now used by stateful operators, much more so with SanchoNet. This is going to be a catalyst for dozens of community projects. So I'll give you one example that I saw just yesterday, where I was talking to Patrick from NMaker, and he mentioned AdaMail, and he said, I'm really excited about this idea of mapping email addresses to state keys. And I said, Patrick, you've just solved this amazing problem. We need to get you a dev grant. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, if you're a DREP, how do you communicate with the people who have delegated to you? There's no KYC. It's a push transaction, so that it just shows up those delegations. Well, if you've mapped the voting keys to email addresses, you now know there's an email address that they have access to through their private key. So all you got to do is just push out an email to all those people. You don't know who they are, but you're now actually communicating with them and only them. That's pretty cool. And we didn't conceive of that. We didn't build that. He didn't even conceive of that. We were just talking, and it emergently came out of that conversation. So the second lesson is that when you build these types of things, what that does for you is it creates a reality where you're now building together, and they're solving problems with you, and they're adding dimensions, and they can do it much faster, better, and cheaper than a formal engineering team can do. And I'd say the final lesson is that what it really does is it creates shared ownership of the idea. 1694 stops being this SIP that these IO guys wrote with some help. It becomes a SIP that belongs to every single DREP. It becomes a SIP that belongs to every single participant in that system. Just like the ITN. When somebody was an incentivized testnet participant, Cardano, that ledger, it became theirs more so than anybody else. In fact, I met some people, they actually had a hard drive, and said, what's on that? I said, I have the entire ITN backed up. It was like emotional. It's like, that's my ITN, I run that, you know. It's like, I can't let that disappear, that's the thing. We just assumed it would be thrown away. So those are the three lessons I'd say, is that, shut up and listen and let people tell back, build with others because they can do a lot more, and then create collective and shared ownership, and then the end product is usually significantly better, and I think we will achieve that with SanchoNet.
Yeah, I mean, the ITN was a truly epochal moment, I think, because it was probably the first true example of where this kind of movement of people united around a vision became a community of builders on a shared toil, on a shared endeavor, and toil was the operative word for quite a long period. I remember very, very late nights with Telegram streaming like ticker tape and certain faces becoming very, very familiar. I mean, the ITN, I think, to Charles's point, it encouraged the community to pick up shovels and start testing, start building. But I think probably one of the biggest surprises was how little encouragement the community needed. There was this tidal wave of interest in the ITN, which through the initial, I think it was 10 or 20 people initially, the pioneers, and then the friends and family up to about 60, and then beyond that, we really did see this tremendous momentum where actually the promise of Shelley was becoming flesh and real. Yes, it wasn't using the same code, it was using a Rust code base. Yes, it was using a hybrid of a test network and real Ada. But as I say, it was really the kind of the true technological rallying point for the community in a way that we really hadn't seen before that point, and many, many lessons got transferred, not merely into SanchoNet where we are now, but this whole idea of building out loud, of seeing yourself as a technologist, as a developer who is there to try and empower other developers in a more kind of open source kind of way. It was a very scrappy form of open source, quite famous for having the word wrecked added to the Cardano lexicon by a certain gentleman long before the days of catastrophic. But it was scrappy, but it was super exciting, and finally everybody knew, yeah, this is why we're here, this is what we're trying to build. So yeah, with SanchoNet, really to try and draw upon those same principles of empowering the people who want to use the tools, who want to govern Cardano, who want to empower their fellow community community members, get them in, get them building, empower them, support them. Hopefully it'll be a little less scrappy. We've got a website this time, which is nice, sancho.network, for those of you who fancy getting involved. But yeah, I think the ITN was a truly formative moment for Cardano, and quite a moment for me personally as well, I think.
What was that website again?
Sancho.network.
Dot what?
.network.
.net. SanchoNet.network.
No, Sancho.
.network.
Sancho.network.
.network.
Write it down, right?
Sancho.
Sancho.network.
.network.
There we go. We got it. Sancho.network.
We might just say it at the end as well, just to be sure.
Sancho.network. Got it? All right, good. Okay.
All right, everybody got a phone? Can you type on your phone Sancho.network? And just show of hands, like who actually has access to the page. Can you see the page?
It's working?
It's
up?
working. It's working. Okay, now the people who have access, help your neighbors and make sure everybody else is there. It's down. Now it's in your browser history.
Good.
I know you may delete it on a regular basis, but if you don't, you now have it forever.
Add it to the bookmarks. If you have difficulty using it, let us know. Everybody should be able to use this. We want everybody to be able to test this. This is how you go from 6 years of development time to 22,000 years of playtime in 1 month, right? It takes all of us interacting with this. This is how we get to the best possible minimum viable government in the near future. We need your help. Next question, real quick. Okay, question number 3. How do you see the founding principles, IOG, Cardano ecosystem, evolving with Voltaire governance coming in?
You know, I always look at it where you have two things you have to solve with any governance system. You have intelligence and wisdom. So intelligence is your ability to do things in an environment with a constraint of resources. So you have some goals and you say, like, I'm a mouse and I'm in a maze and I'm going to try to find the cheese. And maybe I only have 5 minutes to solve the problem before they grab me and shock me or something. Okay, so can the mouse do that? If you have a very intelligent mouse, the mouse can solve the maze. Great. Wisdom is which goals should you pick? So the great example of our human race for this is the Manhattan Project, where it's a hyper-intelligent but very unwise project. It's hyper-intelligent in that the smartest people in the world got together and they did something that had never been done before. They created a nuclear reaction that resulted in the creation of a weapon. It's unwise because they gave that capability to a government that wasn't prepared for it, and into a world that wasn't prepared or could conceive of this, which led to an arms race. And just 10 years after making it, you have the invention of the hydrogen bomb, which is thousands of times more powerful. And almost twice in the 20th century did the human race go extinct. Literally a single person made the decision not to kill all of us. In the case of the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, it was the first officer of a Soviet sub. The captain had turned the key to launch nuclear weapons. The first officer decided not to do that and was punished for it. And then again in the 1980s, a lieutenant colonel in charge of a missile silo in Moscow, a software bug made the people at the silo believe that the Americans had launched nuclear weapons, and his orders were to launch ICBMs at the United States, which would have resulted in nuclear war and all of us dying. And it was so vicious during that time period that the major who was there pulled a gun on the lieutenant colonel, and he was threatening to kill him if he didn't launch the weapon. Twice, 2 people basically decided whether all of us here get to be here. Is it wise to create a capability that has that? So wisdom and intelligence, any form of governance, when we think about these types of things, these have to be the 2 things you always think about. In terms of increasing intelligence, are you gaining the skills and capabilities of all the people who are at the table? Organizations like corporations, governments, they're super intelligent organisms. Think about how smart Google is. How many PhDs work there? How many millions of hours of capability is there on the execution side? Think about SpaceX. They're literally building this gigantic rocket that's the size of the Statue of Liberty. They're going to launch it and go to Mars, and there's a good shot they're going to achieve that. Is it because Elon Musk is doing it? No, he's tweeting on his toilet. It's because there's all these amazing engineers. He really does do that. There's all these amazing engineers that are there that are working on this every single day. Now, that is not an answer to the question of, is it a good idea to go to Mars? That's the wisdom question. So good governance systems handle both sides of, should we do this? Is this a good idea? Synthetic biology is another example. Is gain of function research a really good idea? that a small group of people in a lab can make a virus that can end the entire human race, and we're not going to really regulate that well. Probably not, especially if everybody has access to that and it's on the internet. So good governance should do that. What we try to do at I.O. is we don't really think about trying to inspire and endeavor to be an organization that tells people what to do. Rather, what we try to do is be an organization that focuses on the wisdom side and says, okay, let's talk through what we ought to do and how we should think about this. And we have to do things like broaden your time horizon. The cryptocurrency industry is a great example of this, where everybody is very narrow focused. They have blinders on. They say, what's your adoption today? Not, how do you build something that's going to be here 50 years later? How do you be the first mover to the market? We have to win. Why is the price not going up? Why don't we have more of this? These things. Okay. Burn ADA. That's the ultimate unwise thing. Like Stellar destroys like 20% of their supply. Slight boost in price, goes back down that while. Did that really help anything? So what we try to do is we try to be the wisdom company where we say, let's talk about what we are trying to achieve. Decentralization, the Edinburgh Decentralization Index. Let's measure it so we can understand it. It's about values and goals, constitutions, governance systems, these types of things. Because then what can happen is that everybody can absorb those capabilities, those tools, those thought processes, and ingrain it into their own lives and to their own decision making. Then they can choose what to do with that. Not just in Cardano, but life in general. Then the other thing we do is we try to build capabilities. We gave the world the ability to use ACTA in a software supply chain where now you forever can write formal specifications that can extract the Haskell and be a basis to know if things are correct. That means we can write software in Cardano land that only NASA could write before, and we can do it with a small group of developers. You now have Marlowe, you now have Plutus, you now have Prism. These are for you, because you can use these things, and they're very powerful tools, and just like any carpenter in their workshop, do you always use one tool or the other tool? Well, sometimes, but usually you have a diversity of these things. So it's your decision on which ones to use, but their mere existence makes you more productive, more efficient, and thus more intelligent, more able to achieve the things that you want to achieve. So those are our values as an organization, is to be the wisdom company and to build the capabilities company and go build those things and give them to people, but we will never be the company to tell you what to do. We'll just be the company to say, have you really thought that through?
I think when it comes to Cardano, one of the things that got me most excited about the project at the moment was extremely powerful vision from the get-go. Very, very clear sense of where we were heading. But I think what made it especially powerful was the fact that that was within frameworks. I think, like most people in this room, the whiteboard video was probably one of the first exposures to that framework thinking, that logical clarity of this is how we want to do it. And alongside with that, the original Cardano roadmap. I think our path along that roadmap has had an inconsistent trajectory at times. There have been ups and downs, there have been bumps in the road, but I think Cardano has been relentless in its pursuit of meeting the high-level objectives of that long-term roadmap, and as a result now we're into the age of Voltaire. So that's all very well and good. You need formal frameworks, but ultimately what that roadmap never really captured was the organic growth that we saw interwoven throughout that framework. And I think, events like Rare Evo here today and every community event that we go to just demonstrates the power of the organic growth of Cardano as a network through its community in a way that was never captured in any roadmap. Arguably, there are some elements that probably should be in the roadmap. It would have made life a little bit easier for some of the people who've rolled up their sleeves and built this stuff. But it's just fascinating to see just how many projects now are building the back-end technology to make the development path smoother. We saw Maestro, for example, launch their new service today. Some amazing work being done by people like TX Pipe, alternative languages like Akin. I mean, there's far too many builders to mention here without leaving any out. There was a fantastic tweet yesterday, I think, from Matthew Jura, where he just captured probably about 70% of them. And I think that's what's been so powerful about Cardano in the past. Provide the frameworks, provide some rigidity in terms of rules, but ultimately create a frame in which you can really encourage and drive organic growth, as we say, from the community for the community.
Thank you very much. Tim, I'm going to ask you this last question first. A successful implementation of the minimum viable government is obviously the immediate objective, but what are your wider hopes for the continuing evolution of the ecosystem? What does it look like? What does success look like to you? And where do you hope that it will go from here?
You know, again, the point about the organic growth of the ecosystem is kind of been in spite of the market conditions in many senses. The fact that we still see so much passion and vibrancy within our community when we all recognise that inevitably the wider macro environment is tough for everybody working in this industry. I also saw a fantastic t-shirt somebody was wearing along the way where they said that, I'm going to misquote it now, but the ultimate rewards are about the friends you make along the way. I don't know if anybody else, Woodland Pools tweeted it, and I think it was Betty from Sappy Seals who was wearing the shirt. I don't know if she's here today. I think I need to get one of those shirts. But what to me that really summed up is actually the resilience of the Cardano community and the ecosystem builders, that despite numerous challenges in terms of the core tech originally, building solutions, building connections, building those partnerships which are really now starting to bear fruit, the resilience of the community of builders is astonishing, and I think we all hope for a slight lift in the macro environment that will really again enable builders to maintain that kind of trajectory and the momentum that they've built up so much. And again, supported hopefully by a new model of governance that truly allows people to continue that work, building out and contributing to the Cardano ecosystem and the Cardano platform itself as a whole.
Charles, the same question for you. Obviously, we're working towards a successful minimum viable government. What are your hopes for the continuing evolution of the ecosystem now that we've got this governance layer in place?
Well, first we have to get the governance layer in place.
Once it's in place, of course.
Don't count your chickens before they hatch.
No. Once MVG is in place.
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay. I really do hope that we become the project that shows everybody else how to do it. We're the world leader in this. Bitcoin and Ethereum have recused themselves, and we are the first mover in blockchain governance that really has a shot of getting it done. There's been a lot of people who have tried it, and they've done some really impressive, interesting things, but it hasn't caught wildfire yet. And we have the best shot of any large cap cryptocurrency of being able to do that. And then basically what we can become is the guide for the entire cryptocurrency industry on not only the importance of this, but the need of it. Just like Ethereum was with smart contracts, where it said that's not optional, you kind of have to have an opinion on these things. It's hard because beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What makes a great smart contract system? There's already an enormous variety of opinions about that. Some people who say it should be very restrictive and be extremely reliable. And so that's Bitcoin script. It doesn't let you do very much, but of the things it lets you do, you're not really going to screw it up unless you're trying. Whereas Ethereum is very expressive and open, and you can easily shoot yourself in the foot and then let it fester and have to go chop off your feet. In fact, that's the standard experience. So, no, I'm not biased at all. So, Cardano sits somewhere in between. But then we get criticized because it's more restrictive, and so it's less developer accessibility, so a lot of people building on the platform have a harder time. That's one dimension of decision making, which is how expressive should the system be. Governance is multiple dimensions of decision making. So it's not just this graph in one direction or the other, it's like a 3D thing, and there's different directions you can go. The problem is that how do you decide if it's effective or not? So look at the US versus China. You could, from any viewpoint, say China has been tremendously successful at certain things. They went from one of the poorest countries in the world, where millions of people would starve to death on a pretty reliable basis every year, to a country that is now one of the world's Goliaths and superpowers that is actively doing amazing things. On the other hand, they're also architecting the most dystopian system that has ever been conceived in humanity when they combine social credit with a CBDC, where literally your money can be turned off if you piss off the government. And piss off the government is not even a human being, it's an AI algorithm. You don't even know why you pissed off the government, but you did. And now you are a non-person. It's a Black Mirror episode. So would you say that they're an overwhelmingly successful human rights country? No. Does that matter? Well, it depends on who you ask. Some people don't care at all. Other people care a lot. You know, and it's the same with the Ukraine invasion. It's a wonderful oracle into a person's value system of what do they believe and what do they feel. If they don't care or whatever, it tells you a lot. It's the same event, it's the same set of facts. And when you look at blockchain governance, it's the exact same way. If all you care about is the price of ADA, every single thing that has been done over the last 2 years doesn't matter because the price went from here to here. It's a failed project. And I see this every single day on Twitter. Thousands of tweets, comments on YouTube. You are a failure. You are a scam. Everything you've done does not matter. All of you in the room here who are participating and collaborating and building, you're either part of the scam or being took by the scam, but you have failed, when that's the metric that matters. Now, if we have a different metric like innovation, 168 researchers, over 180 papers, million lines of code, massive amounts of new things, new technology that will change the world, not just today, but potentially 20 years from now. It could perhaps be the most successful open source project of all time. The exact same set of facts, two radically different interpretations. Good governance system, what it has to be able to do is have an emergent property of compromise, where despite the fact that we come and look at this from different perspectives with different value systems, we are able to converge to an emergent perspective where we can ubiquitously agree good has been done. We're not used to this in political systems. It's a team sport. If you're a Democrat and the Republicans win, Hitler has just been elected. And it's going to destroy America, and we're all going to die. And if you're a Republican and Obama's been elected or Biden's been elected, well, that's it. The Soviet Union's here. I guess the Gulag is forming tomorrow. And anything they do is wrong. You know, PEPFAR is a great example. There was so much hate for Bush, a lot of people couldn't admit that millions of lives were saved in Africa treating AIDS. That's an objectively good thing. I know this because I talked to heads of state in Africa, and they said, you know, America can be a bad country at times, but they saved millions of our people with PEPFAR, so we still like them. But you can't even acknowledge that that exists if you're on the other side. That's the political process that we live in right now. Okay, so if we're to be successful in a governance system, not only do we have to have an emergent set of values that we eventually converge to, we have to have the ability to have some objectivity and say, did we do a good job or not? Otherwise, governance can't work, it falls apart, you can't converge to anything, and people can't agree on things. So this is the challenge of our time, and it's a lot harder than making the price of ADA go up, and it's a lot harder than making a great cryptocurrency with a lot of adoption. Because the problem is, every government institution is working against us. They've been pre-programmed to make us hate each other and pre-programmed to make us not have empathy, understanding, or compromise. They've turned us, because of social media, the modern media complex, and the way society is, to make you hate people you've never met, you know nothing about, and you have never ever interacted with in any capacity, or even understand anything about their perspective. Yet somehow we're going to come together, 100+ countries, build an on-chain digital nation, and agree with each other. That's pretty fucking crazy if you think about that. But if we pull it off, we don't just build a great cryptocurrency, we heal the world. Because people will start asking, if I can do it over here, why can't I do it over here? And then we get a better government overall, and ultimately society as a whole gets better. So it's hard, but we'll get it done, because we're smart, we're good people. And I think people are generally good, and I think people want this to happen.
Let's go.